Imagine a kid who didn't dream of red carpets or awards, a kid who just wanted to escape, to play music loud enough to drown out the noise around him. This is the story of how Johnny Depp didn't chase films, films found him. Before the fame, before the iconic characters, there was confusion, rebellion, and a deep hunger to belong somewhere. His journey into movies wasn't planned, polished, or privileged. It was raw, accidental, and risky. This is not a fairy tale Hollywood story. This is about chance meetings, broken paths, and how one unexpected decision quietly changed everything forever. Before anyone knew the name Johnny Depp, before faces were printed on posters and voices echoed through packed theaters, there was a restless young man moving through life without a map. He wasn't thinking about movies. He wasn't visualizing fame. His world revolved around music, survival, and escape. Growing up, stability was a rare visitor. His family moved constantly, changing houses and cities so often that the idea of home felt temporary, almost imaginary. This constant shifting shaped him early, teaching him how to observe, how to adapt, and how to disappear into different versions of himself when needed. As a teenager, he didn't fit into neat categories. School felt restrictive, like a cage closing in. Rules made little sense to him, and authority felt distant and disconnected. Music, on the other hand, felt honest. It spoke directly, without asking permission. Guitars became his refuge. Bands became his dream. He didn't want to be an actor. He wanted to be a rock musician, someone who could pour confusion, anger, and longing into sound. That dream felt real enough to chase, real enough to sacrifice everything else. He dropped out of school young, not because he lacked intelligence, but because the traditional path felt wrong for him. Life outside classrooms was harsh, unpredictable, and demanding. He worked odd jobs, anything that helped him get by. Sometimes it was selling pens over the phone. Sometimes it was construction work. Sometimes it was things he didn't like talking about later. But through it all, music stayed constant. Nights were spent rehearsing, writing songs, and imagining a future where the stage lights replaced the uncertainty of everyday life. Eventually, music led him to Los Angeles. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. It was crowded apartments, shared spaces, and long nights wondering if the next audition, the next gig, or the next connection would change anything. His band struggled like most bands do. There were moments of hope followed by long stretches of silence. Success always felt just out of reach, like something you could almost touch but never hold. During this time, relationships mattered. Friendships formed quickly and sometimes ended just as fast. One relationship, in particular, would quietly shift the direction of his life. He became involved with someone who was already connected to the film industry. At first, movies were just background noise in his world. Something other people did, something that belonged to a different universe. But being close to someone who lived inside that universe made it feel less distant, less impossible. It was suggested, almost casually, that he consider auditioning for a role. Not because anyone believed he was destined to be an actor, but because he had a look, a presence, something that caught attention. At first, he resisted the idea. Acting felt like a distraction from music, like a compromise. But survival has a way of opening doors you never planned to walk through. Money was tight, opportunities were scarce, so he agreed, not out of ambition, but out of necessity. The first auditions were intimidating. Walking into rooms filled with confident faces, polished smiles, and practiced performances made him feel like an outsider. He didn't study acting formally. He didn't know the rules. He relied on instinct. Instead of performing, he reacted. Instead of projecting confidence, he leaned into honesty. This difference, oddly enough, made him stand out. Casting directors noticed something unusual. He didn't feel manufactured, he felt real. When he landed his first significant role, it didn't feel like victory. It felt strange, almost uncomfortable. Suddenly, people were paying attention for reasons unrelated to music. Cameras were pointed at him. Scripts replaced set lists. He approached acting the same way he approached life, with curiosity and a bit of rebellion. He didn't want to be boxed into expectations. He didn't want to play the safe version of anything. Early success brought recognition, but it also brought pressure. There was an image being built around him that didn't fully match who he was. He was labeled, marketed, and shaped into something easily consumable. This made him uneasy. Instead of embracing the spotlight, he questioned it. Instead of chasing bigger fame, he looked for roles that allowed him to disappear again, to transform, to hide behind characters rather than be exposed as himself. Acting, for him, became another form of escape. Just like music once was, it allowed him to explore emotions he didn't always understand in real life. Anger, vulnerability, fear, longing. He didn't approach roles intellectually. He approached them emotionally. He listened more than he spoke. He watched people, he observed behaviors, voices, and silences. Every character became a place to live temporarily, a different skin to wear. What's important to understand is that films were never a calculated goal. There was no master plan, no 5-year vision. Johnny Depp didn't wake up one day and decide to conquer Hollywood. He drifted into it, guided by instinct, chance encounters, and the need to survive creatively. Each role led to another, not because of ambition, but because of curiosity. He wanted to see how far transformation could go, how deeply he could disappear. With time, his choices became more deliberate. He began turning down roles that felt empty, even if they promised fame or money. He sought stories that felt strange, risky, or misunderstood. This decision puzzled many people around him. Why reject safety? Why avoid mainstream success? But for him, comfort was the enemy of creativity. If something felt too easy, it wasn't worth doing. Behind the scenes, he remained deeply connected to music. Even as his film career grew, music never left him. It grounded him, reminded him of where he came from. Acting paid the bills, but music fed the soul. This balance kept him from fully identifying with fame. He saw it as temporary, fragile, and often misleading. His entry into films wasn't about talent being discovered overnight. It was about persistence without expectation, about saying yes when unsure, about stepping into unfamiliar rooms and trusting instinct over preparation. He didn't follow the traditional path of training and networking. He followed feeling. Sometimes that feeling led to success. Sometimes it led to failure. But it was always honest. The industry tried to define him early on. Heartthrob, rebel, outsider. None of these labels fully fit. He resisted them quietly through the roles he chose. Characters that were broken, eccentric, quiet, or misunderstood. Characters that didn't ask for approval. This resistance shaped his career and set him apart from others who played the game differently. Looking back, it's clear that his journey into films was never about becoming famous. It was about finding another language to express what couldn't be said out loud. Acting became that language, a way to communicate emotion without explanation, a way to exist without being himself for a while. And this is where part 1 of his story naturally pauses, not at a moment of triumph or applause, but at a turning point. A young man who entered films by accident begins to realize that this accidental path might become something permanent. Not because he planned it, but because it allowed him to keep searching, keep hiding, and keep telling stories without ever fully stepping into the light. As the realization slowly settled in that acting was no longer just a temporary solution, something inside him began to shift. What started as an accident was now becoming a responsibility. People were watching, expectations were forming, doors were opening that hadn't existed before. And yet, instead of feeling empowered, he felt cautious. Fame had a strange weight to it. It demanded attention, explanation, and consistency, things he had never been comfortable giving. With each new project, he learned more about the machinery behind films. The schedules, the pressure, the quiet competition, the unspoken rules. It wasn't a world built for sensitivity, yet sensitivity was exactly what he brought with him. He didn't enter sets with loud confidence. He entered quietly, observing everything. How people spoke when they thought no one was listening. How silence could say more than dialogue. These observations slowly became tools. He started to understand that acting didn't require pretending to be someone else. It required listening to the character, to the environment, to the energy in the room. Instead of forcing performances, he allowed them to happen. This approach confused some directors and impressed others, but it always felt right to him. It felt honest. As his face became more recognizable, he felt a growing discomfort with being seen. Public attention never sat well with him. Interviews felt intrusive, labels felt limiting. He didn't want to explain himself or justify his choices. The more the industry tried to push him into a specific image, the more he pushed back quietly, not with words but with decisions. He began choosing roles that didn't make sense on paper. Characters that were flawed, strange, or emotionally distant. Characters that allowed him to hide rather than shine. Many people questioned these choices. Some thought he was sabotaging his own success. Others believed he was chasing obscurity. But in reality, he was chasing freedom. Freedom to explore without being reduced to a single idea. This period of his life was marked by experimentation. Not every role worked. Not every film was understood. Some performances were criticized. Some were ignored. But failure didn't scare him. Repetition did. The idea of doing the same thing over and over again felt far more dangerous than taking a risk and falling short. Through all of this, he remained deeply introspective. Acting didn't solve his inner conflicts. It exposed them. Long hours on set left him alone with his thoughts. Success didn't quiet the questions he carried. If anything, it amplified them. Who am I without the character? What happens when the cameras stop? Where does the performance end and the person begin? These questions followed him from project to project. Instead of running from them, he leaned into them. He allowed uncertainty to exist. He didn't try to clean it up or make it presentable. This rawness began to show in his work. Audiences responded, not always consciously but emotionally. There was something familiar in his characters, something unresolved. He never saw acting as a ladder to climb. He saw it as a space to explore. That perspective changed everything. While others focused on building careers, he focused on building experiences. Some were uncomfortable, some were transformative, all of them taught him something. The industry continued to offer him safer paths, bigger budgets, clearer roles, predictable success, and sometimes he accepted them, not out of greed but out of curiosity. He wanted to see what would happen if he stepped into a larger frame. But even then, he found ways to bend expectations. Small gestures, subtle choices, moments that felt human rather than heroic. Over time, it became clear that his presence on screen wasn't about dominance. It was about atmosphere. He didn't demand attention, he invited it. Viewers leaned in rather than being pulled forward. This quiet intensity became his signature, though he never consciously created it. Looking back at how he entered films, there was still a sense of disbelief. A musician who stumbled into acting. A drifter who became a leading man without ever aiming for the title. Luck played a role, undeniably, but luck alone doesn't sustain a career. What sustained him was his refusal to become comfortable, his willingness to remain uncertain. Acting gave him a place to put emotions he didn't have words for. Grief, anger, longing, confusion. Instead of explaining them, he lived them through characters. Each role was a conversation he couldn't have otherwise. Each performance was a question rather than an answer. And so, the accidental beginning became a deliberate journey, not toward fame but toward expression, not toward approval but toward truth, however uncomfortable that truth might be. Films didn't give him identity, they gave him space to explore who he wasn't and in doing so, understand who he might be. This is where the second part of the story settles, not with closure, not with certainty, but with movement. A man who never planned to be here continues forward, guided by instinct, shaped by chance, and driven by a need to disappear into stories so he doesn't have to fully explain his own. If this journey moved something inside you, don't let it stop here. Stories like this remind us that life doesn't need perfect plans, only honest courage. The path of Johnny Depp shows that accidents can become purpose when you stay true to yourself. If you want to hear more real stories of struggle, risk, and unexpected success, stay connected, keep listening, and keep questioning the paths you think are fixed. Sometimes the road you never planned is the one that changes everything.